Imagine a world forged by one man's ambition. A world where cultures clashed and merged, where cities rose from dust, and where an empire stretched from the heart of Europe to the edge of India. This isn't a fantasy novel. This is the story of Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BCE, he was a prince of Macedonia, a rugged kingdom in northern Greece. But this was no ordinary royal. His father was Philip II, a brilliant and ruthless king who revolutionized warfare. His mother was the fiery Olympias, and his tutor none other than the philosopher Aristotle. From his earliest days, Alexander was trained for greatness, honing both his mind and his body. He learned to wield a sword with deadly precision, but he also studied philosophy, science, and literature. They say he slept with a copy of Homer's Iliad annotated by Aristotle under his pillow. He wasn't just being raised to be a king, he was being molded into a legend. By the age of 16, he was already tasting power, serving as regent and commanding troops. He had a fire in him, a relentless drive. You can see it in the famous story of his horse, Bucephalus. This magnificent stallion was wild, untamable. No one could ride him, but a 12-year-old Alexander noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. He calmly turned Bucephalus towards the sun, mounted him, and rode him into history. It was a sign of things to come. What others saw as an insurmountable obstacle, Alexander saw as a puzzle to be solved. Then, in 336 BCE, everything changed. His father Philip was assassinated. At just 20 years old, Alexander seized the throne. The kingdom was in turmoil. Rebellions flared up across Greece, and rival claimants circled like vultures. Did Alexander falter? Not for a second. With lightning speed, he crushed his enemies, secured his borders, and solidified his rule over Greece. But his gaze wasn't fixed on his own kingdom. His father had dreamed of something more, something bigger, the conquest of the vast and powerful Persian Empire. And now, that dream was Alexander's. In 334 BCE, he did the unthinkable. With an army of around 48,000 soldiers, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia. He was massively outnumbered. The Persian Empire was a superpower of its day, stretching across 3 continents, with seemingly endless resources and manpower. On paper, it was a suicide mission, but Alexander didn't fight on paper. He fought on the battlefield, and there he was undefeated. His first major test came at the Battle of the Granicus. He led the charge himself, plunging into the river and fighting his way up the opposite bank. It was reckless, audacious, and utterly brilliant. The Persians were stunned, their lines shattered. It was the first of many victories that would send shockwaves across the ancient world. A year later, in 333 BCE, he came face to face with the King of Kings himself, Darius III, at the Battle of Issus. Again, the Persians had a huge numerical advantage, but Alexander had a plan. He identified a weakness in the Persian center, right where Darius was stationed. In a move of stunning audacity, Alexander led his elite companion cavalry in a direct charge at the Persian king. Panic erupted. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving his family, his treasure, and his army behind. The psychological blow was immense. The invincible Persian Empire had been broken. But Alexander wasn't just a general. He was a master strategist. After Issus, he didn't immediately chase Darius. Instead, he systematically secured the entire Mediterranean coast, including the legendary city of Tyre, which he conquered after a brutal 7-month siege. This move cut the Persian navy off from its ports, neutralizing one of their biggest threats. Then, in 332 BCE, he marched into Egypt. The Egyptians, who had chafed under Persian rule, welcomed him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In the ancient capital of Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh and honored as a god. It was here, at the Suwa oasis, that he visited the famous oracle of the god Amen. The priests greeted him as the son of the deity, a declaration that would shape his identity for the rest of his life. Was he a man, a king, or something more? On the Nile Delta, he founded the first and most famous of his many cities, Alexandria. It was destined to become a beacon of learning and culture for centuries. With his flanks secure, Alexander turned inland, ready for the final showdown. In October of 331 BCE, on the plains of Gaugamela, the two armies met for the last time. Darius had gathered an immense force, fielding scythed chariots and war elephants. He chose the ground carefully, a wide, flat plain to maximize his numbers. But Alexander had studied his opponent. He anticipated the chariots, ordering his men to open their ranks and let them pass through harmlessly. And once again, he executed a daring charge aimed directly at Darius. And once again, Darius fled. The Battle of Gaugamela was a tactical masterpiece. The Persian army disintegrated, and the empire began to crumble. Babylon and Susa, the great capitals of Persia, opened their gates to him. The Achaemenid Empire, which had dominated the known world for 2 centuries, was his. But conquering an empire and ruling one are 2 very different things. This is where Alexander's genius truly shines. He wasn't interested in simply destroying Persian culture. He respected local traditions and religions. He adopted Persian dress and court customs, much to the confusion and sometimes anger of his own Macedonian veterans. He even married Roxana, a princess from the eastern province of Bactria, in a grand ceremony. His vision was a fusion Polynesian attempt to merge Macedonian and Persian elites into a new ruling class for a new kind of empire. It was a radical idea, a form of multiculturalism thousands of years ahead of its time. His ambition, however, was limitless. He pushed his army further east, into lands the Greeks knew only through myth and legend. He crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and marched into India. In 326 BCE, on the banks of the Hydaspes River, he fought his last great battle against King Porus and his army of war elephants. It was a terrifying and bloody affair, but Alexander's tactical brilliance won the day yet again. He was so impressed by Porus's bravery that he allowed him to keep his kingdom, making him an ally. He wanted to go further, to reach the ends of the world, which he believed lay just beyond the Ganges River, but his army had reached its limit. After 8 years of constant marching and fighting, thousands of miles from home, his loyal soldiers mute. At the Hyphasis River, they refused to go any further. For the first time, Alexander had to turn back. The retreat was an ordeal in itself. Part of his army sailed down the Indus River to the ocean, while Alexander led the rest through the brutal Jedrosian desert. It was a catastrophic decision. More of his men died of thirst and exhaustion in that desert than in any battle he ever fought. It was a grim reminder that even Alexander could not conquer nature itself. He returned to Babylon, the new heart of his empire. He was planning new campaigns and invasion of Arabia, a circumnavigation of Africa. He was only 32 years old, and it seemed like he was just getting started. But in June of 323 BCE, after a prolonged bout of feasting and drinking, he fell ill with a fever. For 10 days, the world's most powerful man grew weaker and weaker. His generals filed past his bed, and his army waited anxiously. He died on the 10th or the 11th of June. The cause remains one of history's great mysteries. Was it malaria, typhoid, or was he poisoned by his rivals? We may never know. He left no clear heir. His empire, built on the force of his personality, was vast but fragile. When his generals asked him who his kingdom should go to, his last words were supposedly, "to the strongest." What followed was half a century of war as his commanders. The Diadochi tore his empire apart, carving out kingdoms for themselves. So, was his life's work a failure? Absolutely not. In just over a decade, Alexander the Great redrew the map of the ancient world. His empire may have fragmented, but his legacy was permanent. He had founded dozens of cities, spreading Greek language, art, and ideas from the Mediterranean to India. This new blended culture, known as Hellenism, would dominate the region for centuries and profoundly influence the later Roman and Byzantine empires. His military tactics are still studied in war colleges today. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was a visionary, a scholar, a brutal warlord, and a unifier. He was a lightning strike in human form, a man who burned so brightly that his light still illuminates the pages of history. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that shaped our world. See you next time.